two, we got video from Stanixos. We got Bleach 101, Soul Physiology. You can tell by bro's hat. He's wearing a movie water. He normally makes One Piece videos. I think he's made Naruto videos before. I think he does a variety of videos, to be honest. But a lot of what he does, a lot of his bread and butter, especially early on, was One Piece. But we got a video on Bleach, and I think to me this is an interesting video. To me, I don't know how well this is gonna do on the channel. That's not really what this video is for. Like engaging. This video is for like one, pulling in more people that really is into, you know what I'm saying, the culture, but also pulling in people who want to know more about like the intricacies and nuances of certain things, you know. And one of the things that piques my interest is Bleach, and like the fact that you look at someone like Mayuri, he's modified his soul. You look at, if you're caught up, I don't want to spoil. You look at like Nemu. If you know Nemu's backstory, that's interesting. You look at what Urahara did to Aizen. It's a lot of little interesting pieces about the soul. Feel me? But without further ado, pre-follow like. And yeah, as always, it's the main man Sly. Slide on the timeline, provide you some content. Without further ado, slide right in. We got a long one, man. Strap up.
Hey guys, Stanixos here. So today, in our Bleach Fundamental series, we'll be speaking about the anatomy, meaning the structure, as well as the physiology, meaning the normal functioning of the souls in the Bleach world. Now, in my previous Bleach Fundamentals video, I gave you the classification of Bleach souls in terms of their unique races, whether that's a regular human soul, a Shinigami, a Quincy, a...
I gotta slow this video down. Do 1.1.
Hollow, or hybrids like the Vizords and Fullbringers. Now that classification is very important to understand because it tells you the unique defining traits of these different races of souls. Right. However, when it...
Now that I think about it, I can't even, I know the categories, but I can't explain them. Like Vizord is explainable. It's a Reaper that got exposed to hollow, like kind of DNA. But it's not really, you know, DNA. It's more of like DNA of the soul, like the coding or the data of your soul. But like, I couldn't tell you what makes a Soul Reaper a Soul Reaper. Like, yes, they have their job, they have what they do. But like, I couldn't tell you like the actual, as the video says, like the physiology of like what makes you a Soul Reaper. What is like so special. And I've seen a lot of different things. It's like light novels and things like that. But I haven't truly dived too deep into it on my dolo. I've seen videos from I think his name is DBZ Earman. I don't know if it's Imran, but it's DBZ Imran or DBZ Imran. And he talks about Bleach like often. But like I've never truly got into reading the light novels for myself and figuring out what truly diversifies these souls.
When it comes to anatomy and function, the major classification point that actually helps guide our discussion is whether a soul has low spiritual density or high spiritual density. So what do I mean by that? Well, you see in the Bleach world, at the most basic level, the matter that makes up everything in the human world is called Kishi, whereas the matter that makes up souls and everything within the soul world, such as the Soul Society and Hueco Mundo, is called Reishi. So what this means is that just as how regular matter is made of atoms, spiritual matter is similarly made up of spiritual particles or spiritual atoms, so to speak, called reishi. Now it is also important to note that in the Bleach world, even within the normal matter of the human world, also resides some amount of reishi. This is true not only for living things, but also inanimate objects as well. And these reishi particles are even smaller than and exist in atoms like nitrogen in...
After the smoke in front of her eyes cleared, the shadow appeared with the ruins would be red black dragons around her. Aura Michibane. Aura as a name is kind of tough. So their intrepid smile. I had to say which it is. She controlled the soul and nitrogen. I mean, the fact that they specifically state nitrogen is crazy. But I would think they're just referring to air because there's nitrogen in like the atmosphere. She can do that in the living world where she's thin and she really isn't anything to scoff at. Yeah, because if you were in a spiritual realm like Hueco Mundo or Soul Society, there's a lot more ratio. We see that in like part 1 of Bleach. When Uryu's fighting, I said part 1. The entire Bleach to me is part 1 to get the 1,000-year blood war, low key. You see that early on in Bleach when Uryu's fighting Mayuri and they're fighting in the Serete, and when he starts using his bows, it pulls in the ratio from the environment. So like literally the tiles of the building start turning into energy.
the air. And then, the thing that makes up and also lies within these spiritual particles is of course a spiritual energy known as Reiryoku. And just for completion's sake, Reiatsu, or spiritual pressure, is the physical force or pressure caused by releasing one's spiritual energy. Now, due to the fact that spiritual matter, which obviously includes souls, is made of spiritual particles or reishi, then just like regular matter, different types of souls can obviously have a different amount or a different concentration of spiritual particles. Thus, they can have a different spiritual density. Now note, there is in fact a formal classification for this concept in Bleach called spiritual class, which has a very specific in-universe definition. However, for the purposes of our discussion right now, I want you to think of spiritual density just as a term reflecting how concentrated a soul's body is with spiritual energy particles.
I mean, yeah, I'm a huge physics guy. Density, if I'm not mistaken, mass over volume, you know. If everyone is a soul, everyone has the same volume. Like, even though we have different shapes and sizes, in terms of spiritually, we all have the same volume. That higher density means there's a higher like mass or like amount of energy particles in a compact space.
That is how concentrated it is with reishi. So with that framework in mind, we can divide souls in Bleach into those with low spiritual density, meaning their soul bodies are made of a relatively low concentration of reishi, and those with high spiritual density, meaning their spiritual bodies are made of a very high concentration of spiritual energy particles. Now, low spiritual density souls include things like regular human souls in the world of the living, which we know are called pluses or wholes, whereas on the other side of the spectrum, high spiritual density souls include basically all other soul types, like hollows, soul reapers, quincies, and so on. Now, just to preempt that one, well, actually, guy, I know that quincies and fullbringers are not technically souls. They are humans.
Kishi directly being treated as a soul, Konpaku treated after being pulled from the matter, perhaps. Oh, and this is Kubo's equivalent's like a SBS with Oda, so that's the author's words like answering the questions. Those are the humans, soul reapers, pluses, and hollows, I suppose. While putting aside that hollows are originally human. Exactly. Hollows are made from the humans that die with like the negative emotions, kind of. They're kind of like curses in JJK. And then since quincies are weak to hollows, that makes sense because quincies are humans, but they've kind of used the positive of the energy. If that makes sense. Like, to my understanding, like, pluses are the humans that like are good. If you fuck with the human soul chain or they've gone through enough torment, they become hollows. So if you imagine hollow means what the word hollow means, something that's empty. Pluses, and think of it as pluses, negatives. Quincies are like humans but supercharged. So even though these things are called pluses, hollows are empty, quincies are full of the ability to manipulate reishi. Hollows are like humans that just died. They didn't have this power. So they're the strongest a human can get based off their negative emotions, while quincies are the other end of the spectrum of like a human. I mean, they're a whole separate race. So like they're not really human, but like Steinixos just said, like they aren't souls. They have bodies, real bodies. So, and that makes sense because they manipulate reishi. And if we just said soul reapers have spiritual pressure, and like by definition, they are souls. They're made of reishi. If a quincy were strong enough, like super, super strong enough, they could in theory pull the reishi from your soul and unravel you. But we know that it's very difficult because to be a living sentient soul, your shit is very dense. So even though like they can pull shit from your surroundings, nerf your abilities, quincies normally don't unravel you, but it's a possibility. So it makes sense that they're not a soul, because if they were, if a bunch of quincies are pulling in reishi near each other, they'd end up like pulling their own souls apart, you know? So that makes sense.
However, most of the action in Bleach takes place in the Soul Society, and to exist there, they must be converted from real-world matter, or kishi, into spiritual matter, or reishi, so most of the time they are treated as souls. Now, the density of a soul directly affects both the anatomy and the functioning of that soul type. So, for example, because soul reapers are high spiritual density souls, they can be touched, even by normal humans. This is directly contrasted against low spiritual density souls, like pluses, which function more like the traditional spirits people usually imagine and are therefore typically intangible to normal humans. Now, I really want to hammer this point in for a second, because a mistranslation by Viz, where it's
No humans can't touch hollows or soul reapers. Mistranslation. Okay.
Stated that soul reapers and hollows cannot be touched by normal humans led to people spreading misinformation for years. As a matter of fact, even to this day still. So again, the correct translation makes it
it's true that normal people can touch hollows and Shinigami since they have higher density spiritual bodies. However, they cannot see their forms. Yet the translation doesn't even say that. It says they can't touch the hollows or the soul reapers. I feel you. But here it says they can. No way it's true that they can. Here it says that's impossible. No way. And then instead of saying like it's true, they kind of cut that part out and just went straight to can't touch. Gotcha.
clear that soul reapers and hollows can be touched by normal humans, specifically because of the high spiritual density of their spiritual body. And I really want to drill in on this for a second, because the reason I'm making this Bleach Fundamental series is not only to make you guys better informed about Bleach, but rather, it is also to draw attention to the fact that misinformation like this spread and get embedded into the online discourse and power scaling zeitgeist, not just because of well-meaning mistakes, but rather, it usually is being spread intentionally by people who, even though they know better, are still lying because they are trying to push an agenda. We know this because
like, again, I'm not too heavy into power scaling. I used to think, so like people have Naruto, like the universe, a bunch of people at light speed because of like statements and stuff from data books, and then people say data books are unreliable. And I've been around both sides. I've seen like people who have talked about why data books are reliable and they have hyperboles. Like a data book says Tamari can blow away the universe with her fan. That shit is not true. It's just cap as fuck. A data book says Kurama could burn the entire world. You can turn the whole world to ash. It's cap as fuck. It's hyperbole. Like one of the greatest feats we see is like at most continental, but most likely country level. It's like a feat. One of the highest. Oh my god! It's like a ladybug on my mic. I don't know if I can move it without it moving. Please don't fly. It flew away. Man, I want to show chat. But one of the highest feats in Naruto, I think, destructive capacity wise, and like visually, like a spectacle, is when Madara, creates like a Shibaku Tensei so big that you can kind of see the curvature of the earth. To see that, it would need to be the scale of around at least like a country or like a nation, one would say. At most continental, but like, it's probably not continental, to be 100% honest. But, you feel me? But to get back to the point, people took a translation of Kakashi saying he cut a lightning bolt as a kid, and then said that to go, oh, Kakashi as a kid is lightning speed. But then they used that to gas up other characters, and then they used a statement about Haku being at her max speed, his max speed through the his ice mirror technique, able to move at light speed. So then they said Kid Naruto and Kid Sasuke were able to react at light speed. And if you're putting niggas this low at light speed, the problem with that statement is when Naruto in Sage mode fighting Madara in the war, like I don't want to say barely dodges, but kind of barely dodge. He doesn't overly dodge it. He dodges it by like a thin margin. Madara's light fang, which we have to assume is light speed, and Naruto has the ability, he's in Sage mode, he has the ability to sense things coming before they come. He can detect the intent. So you're telling me this nigga amped 50 million times stronger than him in the very beginning of the show is barely dodging lightning, especially when you can predict it's coming, or not lightning, light speed, but he's light speed in part one. And then on top of that, there's a mistranslation of Kirin in a Naruto in the manga. The manga says it's at, or at least White Zetsu says it is at lightning speed, the speed of lightning. And that kind of debunks the Kakashi thing, because if a Shippuden level technique that's supposed to be the next biggest technique that Kakashi thought would allow him to beat, I said Kakashi, Sasuke thought would allow him to beat Itachi is only lightning speed, why would Kid Naruto and Sasuke, mind you, Kid Sasuke got fucking gripped by Itachi. Why would that same light speed Kid Sasuke think a lightning speed technique would give him a leg up, you know? So there's a lot of like mistranslations happen, and then because power scaling is a subjective thing, A lot of people run with some mistranslations, and then also like just interpretations can be different. Like you can interpret something that's like, oh, they absorb infinite versions of themselves. You can interpret that as like, oh, that means they have infinite power. They're technically boundless. Technically, because there's an infinite number of them. They have a set amount of power. If you only had one unit of power and you absorb infinite of you, that's already infinite power. But if you have like 50 units of power, that's 50 infinities worth of power. You get what I'm saying? It just upscales and upscales and upscales. So in theory, someone who absorbs multiple versions of themselves, when it comes to not like just personalities, but like the power of multiple versions of themselves, they're technically boundless. That's interpretation. You get what I'm saying? So similarly, when these mistranslations happen, it leads to a lot of rigmarole.
Even if you had never seen the correct translation, that honestly does not matter. Because you see, the scene where Rukia says that line is in the broader context of Chad, who at the time was still just a normal human, who hadn't unlocked his full-bring powers yet, and he straight up punches a hollow. And not only that, we later saw Chad hit that same hollow with a regular street pole. So clearly normal humans could physically touch hollows. So Rukia obviously was not actually trying to say that humans can't touch hollows and soul reapers. That would make no sense given the context. What she was actually saying and surprised about is even clarified in the very next line of that same Viz translation. Rukia makes it clear that the shocking part was not the fact that Chad was able to physically.
That's low-key aura, bro. He's attacking a deadly enemy he can't even perceive. Doesn't he have any fear? That's aura, nigga. I'm not gonna lie, that's aura. I'm not. That's a crazy aura lot. That's a crazy. She moving like the narrator right now. That's a crazy aura. And then this panel right here, he got the flannel on. You know he got that shit on too. If he had his hands in his pockets, I would take it to the next. Nigga, aura, fuck him. That's my goat. But then Ichigo said, I could never see Chad losing a fight.
Physically hit the hollow. No, the shocking part was that he was attacking something he could not see. And again, everyone who has read Bleach knows this is the case. Because even before this, when Chad punches the hollow the first time, Rukia's shock and confusion wasn't about the fact that he could physically make contact with the hollow, but rather, it was about whether he could actually see the hollow. Like and we don't even have to guess about that. Because even the hollow itself, in that same Viz translation, comments on that fact. And again, that is the reason Rukia eventually serves as Chad's eyes, guiding him so he can properly fight against the hollow. So literally, the whole setup of the fight revolved around the basic fact that it was a perception problem, not a problem in making actual physical contact. So again, we can be sure that most people spreading this misinformation, that some special requirement is needed to be able to touch soul reapers and hallows, are intentionally spreading agenda-driven misinformation, because even if someone had never seen the correct translation of that panel, even so, basic common sense and simple narrative context would immediately tell you what Rukia was actually saying. But anyway, and just for completion's sake on this point, it is important to note that hallows may sometimes appear intangible, as if they are phasing.
Then you get Ichigo's skull like a Dragon Ball. I can't, bro. Orange hair is like so outlandish.
Through an object. However, that's usually because they're moving through portals in the Garganta. Similarly, they can become intangible in a different way because they're moving through.
He's touching the bed. If he was going through the objects, he would go through the bed. But when he went through here, as you can see, he's making no contact with the pillow. The pillow is not being affected. Here, the pillow is not being affected. Clearly, it's coming off of him coming out of the Garganta.
Portals in the Garganta. Similarly, they can become intangible in a different way, but that's specifically to attack a human soul directly. Now similarly, higher spiritual density also means more spiritual energy overall. Yes. Because remember, spiritual energy, also known as Reiryoku, is what makes up or is within the spiritual energy particles known as Reishi. Thus, because of that, high spiritual density souls, like soul reapers, need to eat, whereas lower spiritual density souls, such as many residents of the Rukongai, generally do not need to eat at all. Of course, there are exceptions at the highest levels of spiritual energy. So when it comes to anatomy and physiology, high spiritual density souls are really the ones we need to focus on because their structure and function are far far more complex. And again, once we're discussing high spiritual density souls, we can further differentiate them into those that are humanoid and those that are not. And soul reapers and highly evolved Arankar work perfectly as our archetypes for humanoid high spiritual density souls. You see, soul reapers and highly evolved Arankars not only look human-like, but they also have the normal human organs. I mean, for example, Soifeng showed us that they have a normal skeletal structure. The fight against Pernida shows us they have nerves. Rangjiku shows us that the organs are in the normal human positioning. And I mean, the 8th Espada Grands basically shows us that soul reapers have these normal human organs. We have even seen that the structure of these organs are for the most part the same as the normal human counterpart, given that Mayuri's drug specifically works on the hippocampus of the brain. And Uryu even directly highlights this fact when he says that an Arankar's anatomy should not be much different from soul reapers, given that their transformation to Arankars makes them more soul reaper-like. And we know that these organs basically function similar to the normal human organs, which is probably best illustrated with Gremi putting Kenpachi in the void of space, where the need to breathe and other physiologic functions are established by the effect that the void of outer space would have on Kenpachi's body, as well as with Ulquiorra, who cannot survive without his internal organs. Interestingly, Kubo even says that hollows can potentially reproduce through sex, like humans and soul reapers. However, there are some specific physiologic differences come through sex, like
I mean, to be fair, the question was very simple, yeah. I can't blame him, but that's simple as answer. It's possible.
Humans and soul reapers. However, there are some specific physiologic differences compared to humans, the first of which is the need to eat. You see, only souls with a high spiritual energy need to eat food. Secondly, Arankars obviously do not have an organ where their hole is. And thirdly, of course, there are individuals like Mayuri that can modify their soul body to function without organs and even turn into and survive as ectoplasmic goo. However, because these are spiritual entities, there obviously has to be some special spiritual organs. So soul reapers have something called the Hakusu and Saketsu, which are spiritual organs often referred to as the...
Oh, it says it right there. I was looking for it. The heart of a soul reaper, is it their actual heart or the heart of their like spiritual energy? Saketsu chain. Yeah, they talked about that actually earlier in Bleach too. Okay.
Heart or vitals of a soul reaper, and that is because the Hakusu is what produces the spiritual energy that flows through higher level spiritual beings, and the Saketsu is the booster. Now it is actually really important to focus in on this fact, that most of the time you are hearing the heart of a soul reaper, such as when Mayuri says, a soul reaper's spiritual pressure springs eternally as long as their heart continues beating, or in the Can't Fear Your Own World novels, where it speaks of Hisagi no longer having a heart, or Saketsu after Hikone blows a hole through his chest. The term heart in these instances are not referring to the regular organ of the heart that you usually envision when you hear that word, but rather, it is referring to the special spiritual organs known as the Hakusu and Saketsu, which are often referred to as the soul reaper's heart, because they are what produce and boost the spiritual energy that a soul reaper has. And thus, if they get severed or destroyed, the soul reaper in essence loses all their spiritual power.
Yeah, and that's why he said if he does survive, he'll have no more power. Because he was a temporary soul reaper. So when he destroyed the source of his spiritual energy, he's like, if he does survive, he'll be like human again, pretty much. He won't have the ability to gain spiritual pressure. And then once this is set as a precedent, which they set early on, now when you hear, oh, he shattered his heart, oh, he aimed for his heart. They're talking about the thing that powers them being spiritually dense beings. Because once they lose that ability to stay spiritually dense, they disappear from being the person that you know them as they are.
Power, and hollows, particularly Arankars, are implied to have a Saketsu and Hakusu by Uryu, given that their anatomy should be similar to Soul Reapers. Gotcha. Now, in terms of actual positioning, Kubo says the Saketsu is at the Jade Hall acupuncture point, which is more or less midline sternum, and the Hakusu is at the heavenly pivot acupuncture point, which is more or less at the level of the navel or central abdomen.
It's literally like thinking about it, like not meridians, but like cores. Like if you read a Miram manhwa / like manga, the idea of like, what do they call it, Danitans, however you pronounce it. I read it, and I we all pronounce it differently depending on how we read it. But it's really like the different cores in your body. There's normally an upper, a middle, and then like a lower, which is like right there where the diagram is showing.
Now, separate from those facts, it is also important to note that every Soul Reaper seem to have their own specific flow of spiritual energy through their body, and they also have spiritual energy vents on their wrists, which, if blocked, causes the spiritual energy to well up inside of them and then explode. Similarly, due to the existence and importance of these vents, if a Soul Reaper loses their arms, and consequently their wrists, they are not burned from the inside. Instead, the cut-off place of the stump
Oh, that's good lord. That's good lord. That's good lord. I like that. I like that. I like that. I like that. Because it's not only like he's keeping the injury, like, oh, you can't fight with both hands. It's like he was really nerfing himself in terms of spiritual power control. So like, even if you were a rival to me before, it's like the Shanks joint with Mihawk. It's like, even if you were a rival to me before, except in this case, like, literally now you can't be. Your job has become infinitely more difficult. You've only become older and older.
Functions as the new vent for the Ryatsu to exit. And while a Soul Reaper can survive the loss of their original vents, there is still the consequence that the control of their Ryatsu becomes extremely difficult without them. This specific loss of control is the reason Iwak criticized Yamamoto for refusing to heal his lost arm. Now the next thing we should speak about is the death of souls. So souls with a higher spiritual energy age much slower than they appear. So for example, Rukia has lived at least a century, yet she still looks pretty young. But even though they age slowly, they still age, and as Baragan notes, everything eventually falls to senescence, though there might be some exceptions obviously. But what is important to us for the purposes of cross-verse discussion is their healing and regenerative ability. So obviously the more spiritual energy you have, the more damage you can generally take, such that strong characters like Toshiro and Shunsui are not even able to pass out from serious injuries due to their high spiritual energy. However, as we already emphasized, out from serious...
You can't even lose consciousness, much less die. What? Truthfully, it would have been a lot easier if I just died right there on the spot. Now, that's actually ridiculous. Aizen even backs up that. It's difficult to even pass out from a wound like that. So it's like stating, yeah, like that should be like a, if not a death wound, you're so critically hurt that you shouldn't be able to function normally. And he's like, yeah, bro, it would be better if I just passed out, but this shit hurt. That is like, yeah, it's a consequence of being tough.
Injuries due to their high spiritual energy. However, as we already emphasized, they can still die, and most Soul Reapers are not able to heal or regenerate, which is why they have a healing squad. This is the opposite for Hollows, who I guess at some point lower in their evolution actually have pretty good regeneration. However, most Arankar sacrifice most of their regenerative abilities that they had as lower level Hollows in order to enhance their other powers. And even those with high tier regeneration, like Ulquiorra, still have limits, as they cannot regenerate their brain and other internal organs, and without them, they will die. And of course, you'll always have the anomalies like Ichigo, who due to being part hollow and part main character, has high speed regeneration that sees like Ichigo, who due to being part hollow and part main character,
he has literally like every genetic possibility, so like
has high speed regeneration that seems to be way above the normal hollow regeneration. And also Aizen, who because of the Hogyoku instinctively protecting him, got regeneration similar to a hollow's high speed regeneration, which has since evolved to the point that he's effectively immortal to those in the Soul Society, as they have not figured out a way to kill him. And of course, let us not forget the members of the Zero Squad who fuse their bodies with the spiritual vein, or Reiryoku of the Soul King Palace, such that as long as the spiritual vein remains intact and one of them remains alive, the rest of them can always be resurrected by calling their names. Now, from an inverse perspective, those are the main points I wanted to discuss on this topic, apart from reiterating that Hollow Reishi is poisonous to Quincy's, as they have no antibodies to it, which is actually pretty important, as it is one of the main reasons for the 1000-year Blood War arc, and is even integral in its resolution. However, one more general point that is important for me to bring up, if only as a PSA to combat misinformation, is the discussion around who can see souls, which is usually most relevant in a cross-verse context. You see, a claim which often comes up is that characters from other verses would not be able to see Soul Reapers, for example.
True, depending on if they can see souls.
Example, because as Rukia said in chapter 5, Soul Reapers are spiritual entities, and thus only other spiritual entities can see them. Now obviously, this is not meant to be taken in the most literal and absolutist fashion, because anyone who reads Bleach knows that this is not true. Like Ichigo, while
Ichigo's a special case.
He was still a human before he became a Soul Reaper, was able to see souls. Ichigo's siblings have similarly been able to see souls. Some of Ichigo's normal human friends also became able to see souls. souls. And even random characters, like Don Kanojo, with no prior interactions with Ichigo, is also able to see souls. And even in the literal first chapter of Bleach, it is somewhat hinted that the bullies actually eventually saw the soul of the deceased girl after Ichigo pointed it out. So obviously non-spiritual entities can actually see souls. The point that Rukia was actually trying to get across here is basically what she was explaining to Ichigo in chapter 1 with the hollow attack. That is, only individuals with higher levels of spiritual energy can see souls, and thus most humans that have very low levels of spiritual energy, unlike Ichigo, who has very high spirit energy, thus cannot see them. This can be thought of as similar to how when Rukia was saying to a low-level spirit that souls do not need to eat. This was not meant to be taken in some literalist, absolutist fashion that no souls need to eat, but rather was just a shorthand way of saying that souls with a low level of spiritual energy do not need to eat, and spiritual energy increases in life or death situations. And that is why characters like Tatsuki, who are not necessarily born with a high level of spiritual energy, eventually became able to see souls after being in a life or death situation with a hollow. And again, I really want to emphasize a specific point here. If you're someone who never read Bleach yourself and ended up believing this misinformation because you trusted your favorite power scaler,
nah, I don't think people from other verses, I don't think this is like, any statement like this is not an absolute statement. It's like, take someone like Urameshi from Yu Yu Hakusho. He sees ghosts. He's a spirit detective. He was a ghost. Yes, he's had enough near-death experiences. Essentially, based off the Bleach logic in any crossverse, I say the bare minimum is they have to be able to see ghosts. But then you could also take it to, if you want to take it to the lowest of low balls, as long as they've been in a near-death situation, you could argue they'd have enough spiritual energy. And as long as they have a spiritual energy counterpart like Haki, Chakra, Ki, etc. Well, Ki's not really, kind of, it's a spiritual energy. Everybody can use it. You should be able to see spirits because humans have a low amount, and Tatsuki, someone who hasn't trained spiritual energy, just from one life or death encounter, got the ability to see it. So at the lowest ball, as long as they've been in a life or death situation, they should be able to see. But once you get there, it's like, okay, they can see them, but they're pretty fragile.
Or content creator. That's understandable. It makes sense to rely on people who present themselves as informed, but at the same time, we need to start clearly acknowledging that many of these content creators and power scalers should know better, and in a lot of cases, they're not just mistaken, they're outright just lying and intentionally spreading misinformation. Because even if we set aside the fact that anyone who has actually read Bleach should have easily understood the meaning of Rukia's statement given all the context, even ignoring that basic application of common sense and intellectual honesty, even then, we are still even left with the fact that the data books themselves make it explicit. That's right, the very sources these creators love to cite and twist when it suits their arguments. The data books, even verbatim, tells us that what's required to see souls is simply high spiritual energy, and not once, but multiple times. It's stated plainly. And it is even on the very first non-table of contents page of the Souls databook. So again, with this Bleach Fundamentals series, I'm going to do my best to clear up as much of the pervasive misinformation as I can, but I can't possibly cover everything. And honestly, I shouldn't have to. At some point, we need to start holding these popular purveyors of information to a higher standard. We can't keep treating everything a well-known content or follower count. That's a
okay. Appreciate you for the video, Steinixos. Appreciate y'all for watching. As always, make sure you stay happy, healthy, and hydrated. I'll catch you guys in the next. Peace.